Rome to Brindisi, how biking down an ancient Roman road saved me from a life of quiet desperation. Chapter 3. Seneca's Mattress. The sun was setting and I had nowhere to sleep. Prostitutes and their customers would soon be lurking about, and there were even worse things knocking around in my own head. I had food and water and a tent. I was surrounded by empty fields, bushes, and many opportunities for a good night's rest. But I pictured the carabinieri picking me up as a vagrant, desperate criminals holding me for ransom. Worst of all, I imagined the Italians would think I was a pestilent mouse-raping transient. When they saw me sleeping out in the open, the people of Lazio would surely turn away in disgust and say, "Che schifo!" Why hadn't I planned better? Why did I waste so much time throughout the day? After you leave the park of Via Appia Antica, you can follow the original ancient route of Via Appia just by sticking to the National Highway SS7. But on the periphery of Rome, this road is full of traffic. In the 18th century, they built a parallel version of Via Appia nearby, called the New Appian Way, or Via Appia Nuova. It runs in the same direction, but you pass through a sterile urban landscape. The route is useful for commuters, but there's nothing to see except the endless apartment blocks and one short glimpse of some crumbling aqueducts. So I stayed on SS7. Eventually the houses and shops gave way to more open country. I followed the road through suburbs, farmland, and acres of grapevines. A few miles farther down, a small sign said Via Appia Antica. An arrow pointed off the road towards a gulch. I followed this path to a stretch of the familiar basalt stones that the Romans used. For the next few miles, I rattled past fields of tomatoes and artichokes. Grape leaves waved at me from thick vines as I rode by. Best of all, there were fallen pillars and the occasional remains of a wall. Later in the day, after the old stretch of Via Appia went back to the main road, I passed through a pungent cloud of sulfur and saw an old man filling plastic jugs from a small fountain. "È potabile?" I asked him. "Is the water drinkable?" "Si," he said. "It's good for the bones." He gestured for me to try it. The smell was like a decomposing pile of manure from a cow with chronic diarrhea. Millions of tiny bubbles clouded the water. Now it's worth noting here that Italy boils with volcanic activity. Vesuvius and Etna are the most famous Italian volcanoes, but there are many, 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 many others. The Alban Hills just south of Rome erupted some 30 to 40,000 years ago, creating the basalt that eventually paved Via Appia. Geologists think an eruption will happen again. Occasionally a few sheep are killed by toxic gas, which is proof that something is still going on down there. There are many springs in Italy that provide water rich in dissolved minerals and gases from this geothermal activity. Apparently, I had just stumbled upon them. I thought about the sheep poisoned by gas from earth. But when in Rome, do as the Romans do. So I drank the old man's clouded water. I'm not aware that anything bad ever came of it, but I probably need to put in a disclaimer here. So, I hope you understand that I am not a doctor. This story is not intended as a recommendation to prevent, treat, or cure any disease. You should always consult a medical professional before you drink murky, foul-smelling water while traveling in a foreign country. Sometime after drinking from the volcano, I rode into Aricia, an important place long before the Romans came to power. Every major art museum in the Western world has romantic paintings that show gods and nymphs in a wooded setting. Many of these scenes were inspired by the oak forests of Aricia. Aricia was also the first staging point along Via Appia. Messengers and important officials picked up fresh horses here. Travelers would stop in Aricia to pick up supplies or stay for the night. I bought food at a small market, including a cylinder of goat cheese with a bitter smell. The shop owner insisted it would not spoil for many days, and he was right. When I combined the cheese with bread, olives, tomatoes, and a bottle of cheap but effective Aglianico wine, I had a banquet. I should have either stayed in Aricia for the night or avoided the town completely. It took a while to get back on SS7, and there wasn't much time left to ride. As the sun dropped low in the sky, I started to wonder where I was going to sleep. I had my tent, and I'd always thought I would just plunk down and camp wherever I found myself, but my own mind was determined to make things difficult. Now let's go back a little bit. When I was in college, I spent a few years living in the redwood forests above the UC Santa Cruz campus. This was kind of a tradition at the time, and there were many woods dwellers living among the trees. I loved waking up to the sound of birds. I loved that I didn't have to pay rent. I loved feeling like I wasn't just an ordinary muggle. When other students went back to their dorm rooms complaining about the cold weather, I would hike into a dark forest to go to bed. I was proud to have a secret life. But this pride was always mixed with a private shame about being homeless. I had a job, clean clothes, and a shower almost every day, but I didn't have an address. I was missing one of the cultural trappings that qualify you as a normal person. Now, over the years, I've slept in cars, in boxcars, under bridges, and in trees. I slept in the snow, in the rain, on concrete, on broken glass, on closed roads, and in open pits. I've slept in backyards, freight yards, and even once in a graveyard. I can feel safe and comfortable almost anywhere, but I never escaped the self-conscious shame of looking like a bum. And this shame felt 100 times worse in Italy because I was a guest in this country. However, I had to sleep somewhere, and there's always one foolproof way to defeat the doubts in your mind. Just don't give yourself a choice. As the sun went down, I didn't have many options. This made it much easier to find a break in the bushes, wheel my bike off the road, and pitch my tent in a field. The rows of vegetables had been cut. Whatever crops the farmer cultivated were already harvested. I wouldn't bother anyone here. Nobody would even see me. As I set up my tent, my courage grew. I thought about Seneca, the Stoic philosopher who wrote A Guide to Happiness. Seneca was rich and important, but when traveling, in his own words, I'm quoting, I put my mattress upon the ground and lay upon it. If stealth camping was good enough for Seneca 2,000 years ago, then who was I to worry about it? I had olives and goat cheese and fresh bread in my panniers. I feasted in the field, watching the very last glow of daylight fade away. I made a truce with myself and felt my confidence return. Today I drank from a volcano. I could go anywhere and do anything. Where to sleep was just a petty detail. This bike tour was my mattress, and I would lay on it. But before I went to sleep in my tent, my phone lit up with a tone Gisela. Good night, TVB. The last 3 letters stand for Ti voglio bene, an Italian way of expressing sincere affection. I knew that my inner peace wouldn't last. Demons gathered, ready to haunt this reckless traveler soon enough.